Focus. Ideate. Innovate. Enable.
India is the fifth largest economy in the world and is steadily moving towards the $5 trillion mark by 2025. And to leverage the true potential of the economy, the role of CAs takes utmost importance. With the aim of identifying and recognizing young CA business leaders for their exemplary work, ICAI, in association with CNBC-TV18, hosted the CA Business Leaders Award 40 Under 40. The event kicked off with a welcome address by CA Durgesh Kabra, Chairman of Committee for Members in Industry and Business and Central Council Member of ICAI.
Good evening, one and all. It's indeed a pleasure for us to welcome you all. Friends, this year I have been entrusted with the chairmanship of CMIB, and what is being thought, which was thought in the last year, has to be completed in this year. And let me tell you, friends, the chartered accountants are very important. They play a very pivotal role as complete business solution provider in the nation building. We provide a solid foundation to the economy, and with our financial expertise, we guide the nation in different financial and economy related matters, which helps Indian economy to grow, and that's how the chartered accountants are also known as partner in nation building. This was a dream of our Vice President Ranjit Agarwal ji, that yes, we must have an award which motivates the younger generation of our profession. And it was also a dream that in time to come, these younger generation reaches to the position of CEO, and the 500 top Indian companies are led by chartered accountants as the CEO. And I wish that some of you, or wish that all of you, will become the CEO of one of the leading companies of this country. With this in mind, I look forward to the panel discussion on tax reforms driving the India growth story. I'm sure that this discussion will provide valuable insight into how we all as one can contribute to shape the Indian economy towards 5 trillion milestone. With this, thank you all for coming here, and wish a fantastic learning in this panel discussion. Thank you all.
Well, as you all know, the tax system plays a very crucial role in ensuring a rapid progress of any economy. And India, the fifth largest economy in the world, has been able to double its tax base since the introduction of the GST in July of 2017. Collections have more than doubled from FY18 to 22 at 14.8 trillion. And India has also jumped 37 places to the 63rd position in the World Bank Ease of Doing Business report, where tax payment, as we know, is a prominent measure for ranking. Now, several reforms have also been undertaken along the way to provide impetus to business and some relief on personal income taxes, and that has helped push consumption to an extent at a time when high inflation has been eating into disposable income. So in today's panel, we're going to talk about the tax reforms which are driving India's growth story and what the future looks like, how technologies and international opportunities can be leveraged to drive a better story. A very warm welcome to all of you, and thank you for your time here. Ms. Kidvaya, I'll start with you to just set the context, because right now the world is going through a difficult phase. India is not an island. We're affected as well. whether it was just coming out of the pandemic, then the war in Ukraine, the central banks around the world hiking interest rates, and now we're seeing the collapse of some of the largest banks across Europe. In this environment, to ensure that India remains on a steady growth path, what is the role that tax reforms can play?
So we have a lot to celebrate in India in terms of the GDP growth that we're expecting, and I don't believe that that is in any way changing. 6 to 7% is the expectation. Clearly not enough. I believe we should be 8 to 10, but we are able to do the 6 to 7% because, as you rightly pointed out, we have robust tax collections through GST. We have therefore been able to commit to a fiscal deficit at 6.4 this year, 5.9 next year. And the process of getting back on track for the fisc is very important for us. And that gets enabled because of a robust tax collection system. Now, for this very well equipped and trained chartered accountancy regime in front of us to translate what are quite sometimes confusing policy in tax into reality, to make it less threatening, less frightening for companies, for individuals in terms of compliance is very, very key on this journey.
And like you said, I mean, in this budget itself, I think we've seen the finance minister announce decriminalizing some of these, tax-related measures. But Mr. Jambasari, I'll come to you. Ms. Kidwai spoke about this, GST revenue, the overall tax revenue growth we've been seeing. 300% sort of revenue growth that we've seen in the last decade, 25% growth in direct taxes in just the last year. But shouldn't we look at these numbers in a more nuanced manner? Because a lot of it is also contributed because of the rising inflation.
It's a right question that why the direct tax and indirect tax ratio is not improving. So in direct tax, the rise that we are noticing is partly because of the growth of the economy, partly because of inflation. But at the same time, we see that the bottom line is not rising as fast as the top line. See, the indirect tax collection depends on top line. So sales would rise, but whether in equal percentage bottom line is rising is the question. Apart from that, some part of the income is not taxed in this country right from the beginning in the form of agriculture. So there are many, and let me very frankly put it, who are declaring high income as agricultural income, and the department needs to be very careful in checking out whether the tax collections are robust, and they should focus attention on this aspect.
Well, very rightly said. And Mr. Aneja, if I could, throw that to you. Month after month, we've been seeing rising GST collections, and no doubt it's been a fabulous reform. But that crossing that 1 lakh crore figure each month has sort of become like a parameter of success. Is that the right way to look at it? Because, with inflation continuing to rise, at some point it is going to start having a dampening effect, and that will translate into lower collections.
You are absolutely right that collection has increased in the past in a big way. But nevertheless, we have to weigh various other things. Like it is now almost 6 years' time that GST has been into, operation. And there are too many things which needs to yet to be done. Rationalization of GST would be required in a big way. We have got number of rates at this point of time. If we see, India is the country where we are having maximum number of slabs. Those slabs have always been demanded, right now are 6, and they should be brought down to 2 or 3. If we see various developed countries which are 136, where GST has been implemented in the past, they are having 2 or 3 slabs. It is fully understandable and fully can be, understood that Indian economy is a very complex economy because of its federal system, where the right of collections are with states and government both. But at the same time, we have to see that few things which are pending, like in the case of GST, if we talk of taking ITC, that ITC is not available on many items which are blocked item under Section 17. Which simply means if there is a clarity in the thoughts that furtherance of business is the important thing, so everything should be allowed. Similarly, it is more of a tax-protected government system wherein, ease of doing business is not there. With the passage of time, these collections are not going to be that robust because cess, GST cess, which was introduced for 5 years, has been extended now for some more time. When this comes down, collection is bound to go down. We have to make our system more rationalized, harmonizations and classifications of various items, and many other works needs to be done to make sure that this collection keeps on increasing and we bring the informal economy and tax evasion can be avoided. And that simplification needs to be done to enhance those collections, which are at this point of time are on the boost and rampant, so that they continues and we keep on getting that type of collection.
No, absolutely. And that is the idea of this summit, to get these kind of ideas and to perhaps take that thought forward. We have people from the government as well here. But Mr. Chandan Agarwal, let me bring you in as well. Mr. Jambusarya also referred to the tax to GDP ratio. That for India has last, I think, it been around 11.7% or so, quite low when compared to OECD or its other peers. Is there an optimum level that we could look at? Because, every country can't have sort of the same figure that they target. Each case is unique. Each country has its own challenges and opportunities. And how do we get to improving this tax to GDP ratio?
Actually, this tax to GDP ratio is always a concern for government, actually, because revenue is what drives public welfare. And India been, at a lower bottom of tax to GDP ratio around 11%. That is always a concern for every citizen, including the government. Because if the revenue is not coming, how the public welfare will happen? Public welfare, there would be some gaps, like poverty or education, health system, military, everything gets funded by tax. Now, how this tax would increase? This is always a concern for government. Now, GST, when this indirect tax system was, clubbed as a GST and digital was brought in, to my mind, that is the starting point when possibly tax reform, the major tax reforms would possibly be first level when this tax ratio to GDP might increase. And that is the reason we are seeing the 1.5 lakh per month, this GST is coming. There is an increase in GST, direct tax collection. But how far it would measure up to the tax to GDP ratio, I think 2 to 3 years more down the line, we might see a better number, around 15%. Maybe government is hoping that number. In all these tax budgets, there is a revenue leakage has been, government is plugging the revenue leakages. If you look at the tax laws, very few areas are there where tax evasion is a different thing, but tax avoidance is also very difficult now. To my mind, tax to GDP ratio is set to go up.
Ms. Kadwai, if you would like to weigh in, improving this tax to GDP ratio, currently languishing at one of the lower figures compared to our peers, what are the low-hanging fruits in terms of reforms that we could look at? And especially with respect to GST, the other panelists have raised concerns, whether it is tax rate rationalization, whether it is the classification. What do you think are some of the low-hanging fruits that the government could target right away?
So clearly, continuing to clean up the GST regime helps, but I don't think that necessarily helps in tax collection, because at the end of the day, that is already happening at tax source. It certainly makes it easier for people to work through the system. So it's cumbersome, interpretation is an issue, it's unfair where ITC is not permitted. So instead of people grumbling and feeling that they are paying more than they get out of it, I think is clearly a way where people begin to feel that the contribution through tax is paying for the journey that they are part of, which is helping the country progress. So less headache and pride going together, that we should feel proud that you pay taxes to help. The counter to that is what do you get for the taxes you pay? So the OECD countries you quote have huge policies in terms of free health, free education, quality of life, clean air. I mean, there's no list, no end to that list. So I think we also have to look at the deliverables that come with that tax payment. If I pay property tax, I should make sure I have roads, sanitation, water that come to my home. If I pay a high tax for, at a corporate level, there must be some services that I get in return. So there has to be that give and take. And I think government has to also ensure that people welcome the tax because there is pride, but also a return for that favor of paying tax, other than just the fear. But at the end of the day, I think the real compliance really comes from widening the tax net. There's a danger here that we keep flogging the same horse. The horse that's paying, so you go back and then hit them again and again to ensure that they've paid the next 10 rupees. And of course, we should make sure that people declare their taxes. But widening the net is what the government has worked hard at, looking at it more through the consumption pattern. You know, if you have a big car, you bought a house, etc., the tax at source is a good way to tackle it. Agriculture, as was mentioned. And I think at the end of the day, it is going to be about making sure that everybody pays their due. I would argue a low tax with many people in it is better than a high tax with a few people in it.
Mr. Jambasare, what do you think? Should the richer sort of cross-subsidize for those who do not earn as much? Because at the end of the day, we are in a democracy. And you know, I know this headline, everybody in the audience would have kept reading, only 5% of Indians pay taxes, but I hope you understand the nuances of that. Because 5% of what? The population is over 1.4 billion. Not all of them are in the workforce. Those who are in the workforce may not have employment, and barely 10% of them would be above the tax threshold. So that's a skewed way of looking at it, but nonetheless, you know, what side of the argument are you on?
Yes, see, apart from what has already been said, like even reducing the tax rate can help, but there is still a big mass of population which is earning in cash. Although digital payments have increased, the track with the government has increased. In AIS statement, you can find many of the incomes already reflected, but those who are still operating in cash, they are not on the books of the income tax department. So the government has to focus on them. Apart from the rationalization of GST, even for people to be facilitated in payment of tax, removing the fear. See, even TDS has many rates. So they also need to be rationalized. Today, there are disputes on whether it is 2%, 5% or more. So all these factors the government should take into account and even see the tax administration. The faceless system has not totally settled. There are many who fear that under the faceless system, what kind of high-pitch assessment they may face. Yeah. So all these fears should be removed, and then there will be more compliance, voluntary compliance from the people also.
You know, speaking of fear, every time we at CNBC are covering the budget and we have guests on the channel talking about their expectations, the word that keeps coming up is capital gains tax. So I quickly want to address that as well. Thankfully, this time around, it has not been tinkered with. But Ms. Kidwai, what are some of the measures that can be taken to streamline it? I know the industry wants it to be zero, to be very low. HNIs are the ones that are being taxed, so there's some rationale behind that. But what do you think could be done to streamline it to ensure that, you know, we don't sort of kill the, you know, investment push or the innovation push from businesses? We ensure that there is a good climate, the ease of doing business remains.
So I think where the capital gains tax is at its thorniest or maybe worst is for startups. Yeah. Because what you've got is a huge risk that a young startup company bears, and the way the computation happens is very early in its journey in terms of taxation. So, and that has been a thorny issue for venture capital, for private equity, for all the money we need that helps the economy, and we are an economy which is very thin on equity and risk capital. It's because we taxed our wealthy business communities from the 99% tax levels which they existed at for a very long time in the socialist days to pretty high levels now, and the amount of risk capital in their hands to grow is limited.
All right. On that note, I think we've all had plenty of food for thought, and you've all been wonderful panelists, and thank you so much for being so candid. Ms. Naina Lal Kidwai, Mr. Nihar Jambasaria, Sanjay Aneja, and Mr. Chandan Agarwal, all of you, thank you very much for your time here, and a big round of applause for all of you. Thank you. Thank you.
We can move towards the ESG economy, which is what is required, because you can no longer take shelter only around the profitability or for the equity holders, that you work for the equity holders, corporations exist for only equity holders.
We have 4 lakh chartered accountants across the globe, and majority of them are below 40 years.
When India is aiming to be a developed economy and the goal is to be a $5 trillion economy, we all have a very, very important role to play.
Focus. Ideate. Innovate. Enable.